In 2001, Devil May Cry was released to the PS2. It was a 3D action game with focus on combat and being as stylish and creative as possible with the various weapons and combos. It was also, obviously, not Resident Evil 4, which it was supposed to be originally. And along with the success of its second sequel, Devil May Cry 3, it created a new subgenre of action games. Many games have followed in its wake, but only few have managed to capture its essence. Still, it's one of the most dedicated single-player genres out there. But, as with many subgenres, nobody can really decide on a name for this particular set of mechanics, about what's important and what's not. So I present to you the shamefully generically named character action game, or how I like it better, the style 'em up. And that's what I'll call it from here on out. Let's see how this video ages. There's only one, well, it's not really a problem, let's call it a caveat. The genre is 18 years old now, old enough to bypass its own age restriction where I'm from, and it hasn't really changed all that much. After I first played Devil May Cry 5, I decided to play through every other numbered DMC to get an appreciation to where the series is and by extent the genre's roots lay. After my little digital pilgrimage, I went back to Devil May Cry 5. Only to find out that not that much has changed. Okay, that's hyperbole. Obviously the sound and graphics have improved drastically and the gameplay is much smoother. But the core gameplay loop is still the same overall. Sure, that's because it's still Devil May Cry at its core. I mean, the mainline Mario platformers haven't changed all that much either. So I looked at other style maps I know. Metal Gear Rising, Bayonetta 1 and 2, God of War, not that one. And they are all more or less the same. Third-person action games with emphasis on melee combat. And it's not like any of the genre names give any clue about its game design. Character action game? Not unless the character is a sword itself. Spectacle fighter? Fighter may allude to melee, but it could also just mean fights in general. Crazy game? Yeah, no. Put that one back in the bin. Stylish action? Again, no melee. Deep action, arcade action and extreme action? They don't even say anything, let alone anything about the genre. And lastly, style 'em up. I mean, it's derivative from the beat 'em up, but then only God Hand would count into that genre. So, bottom line, none of the genre names floating around are really that descriptive. But that's nothing new for subgenres, where we have gems like roguelikes or Metroidvanias, the two go-to examples for this argument. Now what I want to do is to describe the main points of the genre, at least how I see them, to hopefully find a satisfactory definition for it. Afterwards, I will name a few games that follow a similar mindset, to find out how the genre of the style 'em ups could be expanded upon. I will not name a list of what games are and are not style 'em ups, since that would only bring disaster. And I'm already being much too pretentious as is. And yeah, I know there was even a minor war on YouTube considering the definition of this genre, but I'm not known to make very rational decisions, so whatever. Feel free to disagree and give your own interpretations. Just try to keep it constructive, yeah? Now, what makes a style 'em up, broadly speaking? Let's get the big one out of the way first. The smokin' sexy gameplay. As far as I know, is every style 'em up real time. I don't think there's ever been a turn-based style 'em up, but it's an interesting idea. Still, there's a reason all games have been real time. Once you get into it, every good style 'em up has its own rhythm. Every enemy has a speed, and it's the player's job to dance the tango of death in each encounter. And the better the dancer, the more mind-blowing the choreography. And I mean mind-blowing. Something like this would be impossible to replicate turn-based. Okay, not this exactly, just its mechanical possibilities, you know what I mean. So, it seems mastery of the mechanics is a very important aspect to consider. And while I do like these combo mats, I don't think every style up needs to be this mechanically rich, though it's certainly a plus. To continue, all conventional style ups are known for their complex combo mechanics, mostly in the form of weapon choice, chainable combos, and what I'll call combo breakers. Weapon choice is pretty self-explanatory. It means that there are multiple weapons, fighting styles, or in some cases even characters to choose from, that all have radically different gameplay mechanics. All are made with one core idea in mind, so that every weapon has its own niche to work in. That way, they all feel unique and useful. Additionally, weapons allow for various playstyles and for chaining them together, so the player is able to pull off sick looking combos, be it on the ground or in the air, preferably even without needing to pause the game. It's about being creative, so the more tools in your belt, the better, generally speaking. This can be done many different ways. The two most widely known ones are Devil May Cry's approach, where the direction you're holding the analog stick in affects the combos, and Platinum Games' that are mainly built from comboing two buttons. Lastly, the combo breakers. These are a bit hard to categorize, but they are just as essential to the experience. I describe them as moves that are mostly independent of the weapon and serve to further deepen the combat possibilities. They are special because they have unique attributes or quirks to set them apart from normal comboing, making them good as setups or finishers. Good examples include Bayonetta's breakdance move or Nero's gun in DMC 4 and 5. Yet another very important factor is the possibility to avoid damage. It's generally accepted that it isn't cool or stylish to get hit, so there are almost always ways to dodge or protect against incoming hits. Perfectly blocking or dodging is also rewarded in this genre, with more than just not taking damage, even if not all games are equal in this regard. As it stands, I would say these four aspects are important mainstays of the genre, but it would be unwise to keep them in too tight a grip. Let's not get bogged down by semantics and say all of them show again how important deep combat mechanics are. And speaking of looking cool and stylish, since the games are trying to sell spectacular combat at the forefront, it's become a genre staple that the player is graded for their performance, be it during or after the challenge. This is important because it shows the player in easy to understand terms how they are doing, and in most cases even what they can do to improve. Not only that, but these systems often only give out diminishing returns for repeated actions. Meaning you can't only use one attack if you want to be cool. You'll have to experiment and use your whole moveset. I mean, you certainly could play through Bayonetta using only the basic punch-kick-punch combo, but where is the fun in that? Another way to quote-unquote grade your performance is by having a hit counter, displaying a count of how many subsequent hits you've dished out without getting hit yourself. And while this system certainly works and some games make good use of it, it's more often than not a feature of another action subgenre, the hack and slash. Without going too deep into it, while the style ups focus on mastery of its stylish action and intricate combos, the hack and slash favors easier combat mechanics and for the player to feel like a one-man army. That's not to say that hack and slashers are always easier, just that the combat isn't as deep. No one genre is better than the other, and there are no hard lines, making it difficult to even place some games in one genre or another. Okay, so in summary, grading the performance of the player or visualizing their mastery over the system is certainly one of the defining features of style ups. Not much use in having all those combos otherwise. We need to talk about two more mechanics that flesh out the combat: the shop and the trigger. The shop is interesting. Every game handles it a little differently, but the one thing that's always the same is that you can buy moves for in-game currency. They can be upgrades to existing moves or even completely new ones to broaden your possibility space. This way, you can decide which moves you want or need yourself, as well as incentivizing stylish play to get more currency to get more moves. It may not be a realistic or even immersive way to unlock new moves, but it's very helpful as it combines many mechanics without getting too complicated. The trigger is, just like the shop, different in every game. Originally, it was just a way to power up your moves and to heal a bit at the same time. But then Platinum came and made it into a fuck you in particular button. And then a fuck everything in range button. This was a mechanic from fighters, where you could unleash a devastating attack after dealing or taking enough damage. Here, it works as a good way to recover from mistakes, sort of like a safety net, but also to dish out some major damage in a tough battle. In short, it helps keep the flow of battle up, and to spark even more engagement with the mechanics. These two aspects are certainly essential to the feel of some of these games, but since every game puts their own spin on things, they seem to be not that important to the overall genre. Next, I want to talk about the enemies themselves. I could go on and talk about taunts and cancels and whatnot, but while they are neat, they are by no means a requirement. For me at least. Can't say the same about the enemies though. Enemies are maybe the most important part of every action game, and in the Style 'em Up, the strength of the gameplay is as dependent on the player's moveset as it is on their foe's complexity and readability. This means it's not the amount of different enemies that make the gameplay, it's how you use them. Make them react to the player by using different moves, and make every move stand out to be instantly recognizable. Make them weak to certain attacks or strategies, and don't make them too tanky. Enemies should be a challenge, not a brick wall, because that's the job of the bosses. But even bosses are more than just spongy sacks of health. They are the very real opposition to your goal. They have motivations on their own, which they will gladly tell you once you meet them.
The price to pay for power? Humans. They are but stubborn and foolish. It takes a journey to hell for them to accept and praise their god. A fact that tickles Irony's judgment.
It's normal by now in the genre that the player character and the boss have a few lines of snarky back and forth before fighting. This characterizes the boss as someone you want to beat, just out of spite, while also giving the hero time to show off. Bosses can come in all sizes, and they all have one core theme their battle revolves around. The more creative, the better. Be it a lady armed to the teeth, or a lady armed to the teeth. And then there's the rival. He has a very special role in the narrative, in that he's the driving force of the story and the growth of the main character. He's everything the hero needs to be, while at the same time being something they don't want to become. While the rival is strong and focused, he's also blinded by one single thing, be that power, money, jealousy, heck, maybe he's even brainwashed. Fact is, the rival isn't right in the head. And so the hero fights hordes of enemies just to finally face him and disprove their rival's point of view by beating the living crap out of him. Antagonistic forces like these are great, and they are also very important, but honestly, is it really that necessary to write enemies into the definition when the game is already about mechanically deep combat? You generally need enemies to have a functioning combat system in the first place. Now, Style 'em Ups aren't exactly known for having good or sometimes even coherent stories. That doesn't mean there aren't some absolute masterpieces out there. There certainly are, but it would be hard not to call most of them at least derivative. If you are at all familiar with the hero's journey, you know what'll come next. Our hero starts at status quo, only to be thrust into a situation that's way above their pay grade. They must first pass a test to prove their worth and to cross into the unknown territory. At the first big climax, they meet their rival and are confronted with their biggest weakness. After that, they have to undergo a rebirth, in this case accepting part of the unknown world within them. From here, there are some more trials and tribulations before meeting the rival one last time face to face. As I said, this is more a fight of ideologies than it is of pure strength. In the end, the hero emerges the final victor, completing their character arc before taking their leave and returning to the known world. It also doesn't hurt if the main character rides a bike at some point, whatever the reason. Now, I'm not saying that every style 'em up is like this. Hashtag not all style 'em ups and stuff, but fact is, many are, at least to a certain extent. And this is a perfectly acceptable way of presenting a story, but it seems wasted that so many games follow the same template. The only game I can name off the top of my head that breaks this formula somewhat is Nier Automata. I still haven't played it to completion, even once, but I know for a fact that it has some phenomenal storytelling. And it seems to be a far cry from the hero's journey, so things are looking bright. In terms of importance though, I would say that the story itself isn't that crucial to the genre, but the theme of growth certainly is. But since many action games have an adventure-like story, and adventures are themselves about growth and overcoming obstacles, this is more or less implied, so I think we can leave it out. Lastly, I need to talk about the presentation. There is no one true graphic style for style 'em ups, even if the first Devil May Crys were Gothic inspired. But that's only because of its Resident Evil roots. Still, it fit well, and so Devil May Cry and Bayonetta lifted certain aspects and themes from it. Over the time, the games have started to look more and more like a mix of anime and real life. Though I think this is mostly because of the visions of the designer instead of some overarching genre style. This way, the enemies can look wacky without breaking immersion, and the action can still look believable. Though I must say, what sets style 'em ups apart from the masses, at least in terms of animation, is that combat. The animations need to be polished to a sheen, and it shows. Every fight has so many moving parts, and managing it feels and looks stylish as hell, making good on its genre name. This is the only genre that gets me consistently in the flow, forgetting my controller and just playing. Finally, let's go briefly over the music. Many, but not all style 'em ups have one thing in common when it comes to music. The battle themes are absolute bangers. It's not even funny how many times I can listen to them and still not get bored. And I'm normally not even such a big fan of music this high energy, but these are always one of my favorite songs of the year. Moon River or Devil Trigger, not to mention the Metal Gear Rising soundtrack. I could listen to them forever. So I can't really be objective about it, especially because I don't even know anything about music. And honestly, I don't even think the art style or music are that important for the definition. Sure, the theme needs to be in tune with the game's design, be it artistically or musically, but that's true for every game, or work of art in general. What is very important though, is the previously mentioned stylish looking combat, and not only because it's the namesake of the genre. Deep and cool looking combat go hand in hand, so let's not part them. And there's that. I hope I didn't forget anything. Now, let's see what we have decided to be our crucial aspects. We have mastery of the systems, mechanically deep combat, performance grading the player, and of course stylish looking combat. It's not that much, but I think it's enough. Put together, it would be something like games with mechanically deep, stylish looking combat that incentivize mastery of the systems by grading the player on their performance. That's certainly a mouthful, but a defining mouthful. But this is by no means an end-all be-all definition of the genre. Heck, it's not even that decisive. I mean, what exactly even is mechanically deep, stylish looking combat? And not only that, some of my arguments were based solely on evidence as flimsy as my experience or game feel. In the end, this is just my dumbass take on what I like in my style 'em up, so please take everything I say with a grain of salt. Now that we have our definition, we can go about expanding the genre, at least theoretically. As I said, I will examine 3 games that, while they are not style 'em ups as per my definition, they do follow a similar mentality on game design. To start it off, first game. Like I said, Every style 'em up has ways to avoid damage, and most even reward perfect timing. But what would happen if blocking and dodging hits was much more important than attacking even? Let's take a look at FromSoft's Sekiro to see how that would look like. Sekiro certainly requires mastery of its systems to beat, but it doesn't grade the player on performance. The reason? It's not about killing the enemy as stylish and untouched as possible. It's more about persevering and just killing the damn bastard after countless attempts. But it's not about whether Sekiro is a style 'em up or not, but rather examining its strengths. In boss fights, you can rarely be proactive unless an opening appears. You will have to be on the defense most of the time, waiting patiently and blocking every hit while your opponent wails away at you. The brilliance of Sekiro's combat is in its two quote-unquote health bars. The first represents the enemy's vitals, like it always does, but the second indicates the enemy's stance, how secure their guard is. Blocking attacks raises the stance bar, and once it's full, you can execute the enemy. And since stance regenerates rather quickly, it's important to be mindful as to when you have to defend and when you need to attack, ensuring a hectic but deliberate fight. Now throw in attacks you have to jump over, and some you even have to dash into, and you've got yourself a mechanically deep combat system without combos. Sekiro is certainly a hard game to get into, and I had some trouble even getting this footage after not having played in a while. But its gameplay loop is just as addicting as any style 'em up I've played, even if it's for other reasons. As established are many style 'em ups melee focused, but what if there was a game where shooting's the main way to attack? No, not like that. More like this. This is Bright Memory. Made by mainly one guy, I would describe this game as the pilot movement from Titanfall 2 with the general mechanics and grading system from Devil May Cry with almost AAA quality. If that sounds either interesting or completely ridiculous, I highly recommend you try it for yourself. This game doesn't boast with crazy combat depth or even that many different weapons. Heck, it doesn't boast with anything really. It's $5 and still in early access, but this game is worth the money even now in its incomplete state. It's something completely new, while also being faithful to the inspirations. Maybe even a bit too faithful. I mean, you can throw a small slowdown sphere, like the one from Devil May Cry 5. And create a sustained damage dome, reminiscent of Virgil's Judgment Cut End. And have literally Dante's Devil Trigger from the DMC reboot. And all of that, while also shooting some Dark Souls dude in the face. I rest my case. But to be serious, this game does a great job of combining two genres without making too many compromises. And at least that is commendable, even if it's still rough around the edges. And last but not least, the third game. Have you ever wondered how a style 'em up would look like in 2D? Or what it would look like if it had actual good platforming? This is Azure Striker Gunvolt. Surprised? Well, I was too, but let me explain. See, like the other games, Gunvolt is no style 'em up, and like Bright Memory, it has no mechanically deep combat. Fighting in this game can be pretty challenging when going for perfect runs, but casually, everything but the boss fights is a breeze. That isn't to say that the game doesn't have any redeeming qualities. It has, and we're going to look at one of them now. Okay, so the most interesting part is how the game measures the player's performance. Normally, fights in most action games are in so-called action bubbles, where all exits are cut off in an arena for a fight. But in Gunvolt, and most platformers in general, these don't exist. Well, except when they do, but let's ignore them. Instead, the whole level is theoretically one continuous fight in Gunvolt. Every time you damage an enemy, you get kudos. They are important for your grade at the end of the level, so you want to keep them as high as possible. But they reset back to 0 once you get hit too often. Should you use a special ability or decide to activate a checkpoint though, your kudos are cashed in and counted towards the score. So there's an interesting question being asked here. Do you cash in your kudos just to be sure, or do you skip the checkpoint and keep building them up, hoping you won't get hit? And as further incentive, should you manage to reach 1000 kudos, your sidekick will sing a J-pop version of the theme of the level, which is always a delight. Unless you don't like J-pop, of course. Well, there we have it. This is just about all I wanted to talk about. And I know Nilo exists as a style 'em up shooter, but since I have not played it yet, I couldn't really analyze it. I just hope this video can spark some discussion, maybe even help in defining the genre. I love these games and I would love to see them branch out into other genres. So I'm ready for something new, but it's not like I'll be starving for style 'em ups in the near future. I still have to finish Nier, and DMC5 has pretty much been my game of the year from the moment I finished it. And then there's also Bayonetta 3 and Astral Chain. And while I'll certainly play all of them, I'll also continue to keep my eyes out for strange genre mix-ups. Innovation is what keeps subgenres alive after all, even if I'm more or less a new fan. I didn't grow up with Devil May Cry, and I wasn't able to properly play through 3 until after I finished Devil May Cry 5. But if there's something like retroactive nostalgia, let's say I understand the hype. And speaking of Devil May Cry 3, I think I have the perfect way to end the video.
Remember what we used to say? Jacket.
Nailed it.